everyone. A very warm good evening, good morning, and good afternoon to one and all. A very happy day indeed. So I'm Sheetal and I'm going to host today's session. This is our 12th edition of Chennai Storytelling Festival, and it has been a wonderful journey so far. When we started, it was all offline, and we just used to have one or two people coming from out of India to either train us and share their insights on storytelling on us. But after the lockdown, we spread our wings and we are around the world now. We have people coming from around the world to tell stories, and we are so happy learning from everyone the different ways, the different techniques of doing storytelling. And it has been a wonderful journey till now. Thank you, Eric, for this opportunity, and thank you for giving us Chennai Storytelling Festival. So with that, we start our session with our very first storyteller, Elisa Pearmain from USA. Ma'am, the mic is all yours, please.
Oh, thank you, Sheila. Thank you, Eric. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good day, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. And I am going to start with a folk tale from Thailand, and I'm going to tell it in the first person, as I sometimes do. When I'm playing with story, I often like to take on the characters and learn from them, and sometimes even find new meaning in the story. So give me just a moment to find this character. Good evening, everyone. I should introduce myself. I am the advisor to the king, or else I was till earlier today. It's been a terrible day. I hope you don't mind if I share my story. I think it will help me, at least. It didn't begin as a bad day. It was actually lovely. The sky was blue, a hint of a breeze from over the mountains, and best of all, the king said there'd be no pressing business today. We could sit on his balcony and just relax. And so we did. We sat at a little table along the rail, and while the servant came and put down a tray and of freshly baked rice cakes and drizzled it with the most delicious honey and poured our tea. And we sat back, the king, hand on the rail, surveying the beauty of our little kingdom and the smells and sounds of the city square below. And being an observant advisor, I couldn't help but notice that the sun was beaming down on his rice cake and melting that honey. And I noticed a little bit of it melted onto the rail. I said, "Oh, Your Highness, I've noticed a little honey has dripped onto the railing. Shouldn't we call someone to come and clean it up?" He said, "Ah, my dear advisor, a little drop of honey is hardly our problem. This is a day to relax, enjoy. Someone will deal with it later." "Of course, Your Highness. I know how to relax." But I couldn't relax because I noticed that the sun had melted that little drop and it fell down from the rail to the street below, attracting insects. I said, "I do think Your Highness would be concerned to know that that drop of honey is now in the street, attracting flies. Shouldn't we call someone to clean it up?" "I think I just got through telling you that a little drop of honey is not our problem. Someone will deal with it later. Are you going to be able to relax?" "Of course, Your Highness." Deep calming breaths. It's what I do very well. I couldn't relax because I could see down below that now lizards had come out from under the buildings in great numbers and were licking up the flies one after the other. I said, "Your Highness, sorry to trouble you, but lots of lizards in the street is not a good thing. Shouldn't we call someone to come and clean it up?" "You have got to be quiet. I'm trying to relax." Zipped. Not another word. How could I relax? For now I saw that the baker's cat had rushed out from the baker's shop and was batting the lizards back and forth like toys, and the butcher's dog came rushing out from the butcher's shop, grabbed the cat by the neck, and was twisting it this way and that. I said, "Oh, Your Highness, I know you don't want to be disturbed, but certainly you didn't want a dog and cat fight in the street, do you?" And so I sat and watched in horror as the baker came out and began to beat the dog with her rolling pin, and then the butcher came out and began to beat the baker with his broom, and soon the two were hitting each other, and then other vendors joined in. Next thing you know, there's a brawl, and people are taking sides, and someone throws a mango and a potato, and next thing you know, it's a rock, and then after that, a torch comes barreling right into the center of the crowd, and another, and a third, and it wasn't long before a servant came rushing out onto the balcony and said that we must leave the palace at once if we wished not to burn, as the palace was on fire. It was many hours later that we were allowed to come back and survey the ruins of our once beautiful palace. And it was then that the king, looking down, noticed a little puddle of something, and he bent down. Oh, honey. Oh, honey. That drop of honey, I guess it was my problem. And I wanted to strangle him. I wanted to say, "You ninny, you nincompoop, you foolish man." But a troubling thought came into my mind. Why hadn't I just cleaned up that drop of honey in the first place? All this trouble could have been saved. So you can see it's been a very bad day. But I do appreciate your listening to my story. Thank you. Now we shake off that lovely anxious character. So I thought I would start today with that story because I think that there is so much in the world right now that is wrong. So many drops of honey that have gotten way out of control, and it's so easy to feel powerless, and we can't deal with all the trouble, can we? We each have to pick the area that perhaps we can offer the most. And I like to tell that story when I'm doing my bullying prevention programs, middle school, sometimes high school, and adults, of course. And after I tell that story, what I like to do is to make a bridge to a personal story to help them think about, are there times when you didn't act or you did? And I will share two personal stories in that regard. The first happened when I was 11 years old. In my class at school, there were a group of girls who called themselves the group. And they had a group leader, the most popular girl in the class, and her name was Kathy. And she got to decide who could be in the group and who couldn't. And I certainly wasn't. And they were mean to people who weren't in the group. And at times they had been mean to me. But one day, Kathy's pencil broke, and I lent her one of mine. And the strangest thing, the next day, she passed me a note that said, "I would like you to be my best friend and vice president of the group." Well, against my better judgment and wanting so much to be someone's best friend and someone popular, I joined the group. And I continued to see them not being very nice. I didn't join in, but I didn't say anything either. And one day I went out to recess, and Kathy wasn't there in the group. They were all gathered buzzing like bees. I said, "What's going on?" They said, "Kathy got called to the principal's office because she called Rachel a bad name about her religion." Well, Rachel was one of my oldest friends. I knew it was wrong, totally wrong. But I didn't say anything to Kathy or to Rachel. I didn't think it was my job because I wasn't there. But it didn't feel good. And I realized now, or it didn't take me that long, but I realized that I could have stopped a little drop of meanness in Kathy from spreading if I had said to her, "That is not nice. Please don't do that anymore." If I had had the courage, might have helped her, might have helped a lot of people. And if I had said to Rachel, "I'm so sorry, that's totally wrong. She's wrong. I don't believe that. You're wonderful, and I'm really sorry." I think it might have helped a little drop of sorrow and anger and fear from growing in her. I assumed that she wouldn't blame me because I wasn't there, but the truth was, I was Kathy's friend and I didn't say anything. So she assumed that I thought it was okay. And our friendship was never the same after that. Well, it took me some time to find my voice, but let me just say that as a result of that, I felt ashamed and I felt powerless. And it wasn't for a number of years that, as I recall, that I had a chance to find my voice. I was in my late 20s and a friend and I were playing tennis in a tennis court in my neighborhood. And two men came and joined in the court next to ours, and they were just playing back and forth with such grace and ease and never missing a shot and all the time carrying on in their native non-English tongue. Well, I noticed some teenage boys moved to a bench just outside of the court. They were smoking cigarettes and laughing, and all of a sudden, the man on my side missed the ball, and he had to go back to the very edge of the court and bend down to pick it up. And as he did, two of those boys went right up to the fence and they stuck their faces against the wire. And they started to say awful things that I won't repeat and to tell them to go back to where they came from. And I was so upset. I just ran over and I said, "Shut up, shut up. You look so stupid when you talk that way. Don't go away." Well, they squished out their cigarettes and ground them into the dirt as if they wished they could grind me out, but they did go away. And the man thanked me. And I don't say that because, oh, aren't I great? I say that because it really let me know that people do need to know that other people care. They need that. It's that little drop of fear, of anger, of hurt. Maybe we can't make it go away completely, but we can help by being good bystanders. But I was still really angry from what happened. I felt like, oh, telling them they're to shut up and they're stupid doesn't teach them anything. And I fumed until I came up with an answer. I was a storyteller by that time, and I knew what to do. I knew that what I wanted to say to them was, look, your ancestors came here. In the States, everyone has come from somewhere else except the native peoples. We all have stories of our ancestors coming for a lot of the same reasons. So I put together an immigration program where I went into the schools and I helped the kids learn and tell their own stories and to realize that most of us share a common story. And it really did build empathy. And then instead of shame, I felt excitement. I felt courage. I felt good because I had used one of my talents to help in a small way, of course, but that's enough. That's enough. That's enough. So I thought that I would use the rest of the time, which I guess is only a short amount of time, but I'm hoping that some of you might like to share or ask me a question, something you noticed, either about my choice of first person telling or a story that jumped into your mind about letting our voices ring out. Anybody care to put a hand up and share? I can't, well, I guess I could see if a hand went up. Yeah.
So
June?
yes. June.
June?
Yes.
Hi.
Hi. I loved your telling of that. Before you even got to the second line, I instantly knew what story you were telling because I thought in my mind, oh, I know the story I could tell that with. And
Good.
just loved your example. It enriched that story, and if you don't mind, I can't wait to try it out in that first the narrator because it came across as an almost fuller story, and then at the end, I loved where you tied in. I could have solved that problem. I'd never thought of that before, but it's a wonderful ending to that story, and I thank you for that very much.
Well, you see what just telling it from a different perspective can give you that added insight. We're always looking to someone with more authority to take care of things, and we don't need to do that all the time. So yes, oh, enjoy it, have fun,
Thank you.
and and maybe you
Yes.
have your own stories you can bridge, because I think that's really powerful. Oh, I see a couple other hands,
Yes.
so maybe we'll go on. But thank you. Nice to meet you, June. All right.
Moira? Yes.
Sarika?
You can unmute yourself, please.
Sorry.
Moira?
Oh, Myra, she's calling on you, Myra, I think, to unmute.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I thought it wasn't my turn. Yeah. Thank you so much. I have your book here. You know, I haven't started reading it yet, just the introduction. Oh, that's my kind of storytelling, not only from the stories, but what they are, the reason they are told for. And I only vaguely remember the story of the drop of honey, but as June just said, giving it that turn, and together with the second story, it makes so much sense. It's like, so what I feel, what is going on in my country. And thank God, lots of demonstration here in Munich, where they usually have the beer festival. The last Sunday, there were about 100,000 people silent, just with lights in their hand, against anti-Semitism or this right-wing stuff, which is bubbling at the moment. And you put, I don't know how you could have put it more lively, more tangible, more understandable. So simple. It's just wonderful. And I feel I'm doing sort of interfaith stuff and all that. So it's very encouraging, because I think we all have our moment where I think, oh, what the hell I'm doing that for, that a handful of people who are listening. And that's not the case. It's sometimes really yeah. Thank you so much, Elisa.
Welcome. You're welcome. Do we have time for Sarika?
Yes, we have. Please.
Oh, good. Thank you.
That was wonderful. And I liked, so many things about this story. It's a very simple story, and we all know the story, but the way that you used it, immediately I was thinking of so many ways I could use it with young children, children who are between the ages of 12 and 16. And I'd like to share a little, personal story of my own. In the school that I worked with, there was a young boy who, after, a whole day in school, went back home and hung himself. And it was only much later that all the other friends around him, they were covering up for him. And I was thinking that a story like this could have helped those children come forward. And so there are so many areas, of mental health, maybe Me Too movements and things like that, that this story could be used, because it's a fun story, but it's got such a, important message behind it. I think a serious message that could be easily understood by children or any young adults. And even myself, I think the way you did it was amazing.
Well, thank you for drawing out that another important way to help kids realize that you see something, you've got to say something. You hear something, you've got to say something, not wait for someone else. And in those situations, it's so important. So thank you very much for sharing, and enjoy. I love that everybody can take things out in their own way and help. Isn't that what the story is about, right? So do we have more time? I thought I was done at 8:50 and I don't want to hold up the next teller.
Indeed. No, that's fine. We have anybody else wanting to say anything?
I think it's
Do we have anybody?
Jen. I think Jennifer's turn is next to share, but thank you all so much and have a wonderful storytelling day.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Elisa. It was a wonderful story. And yes, I loved the first person when you started the story in first person. That was really amazing. And the way you connected it, that was really something really.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so much
Sita.
for being here.
Bye.
Yes. So we have our next teller, Jennifer Munro. Ma'am, you're ready? Yes. All to you, ma'am.
It never fails to amaze me how synchronistic stories are. And you'll know immediately what I mean when I tell my story. Wearing a pink suit and low-heeled cream shoes, I hoped I was dressed appropriately for the interview for my first ever full-time job. It was 1967, and I was 16 years old. Now, I was relatively smart, but the year before, my father had died. He was the sole breadwinner of the family, so we 4 kids had to go out and do what we could to put food on the table. Well, I peered anxiously up the street, hoping that the bus wouldn't be late, as it occasionally could be. And behind me, a man, he was sort of pudgy. I could see him out of the corner of my eye. He was wearing old sweatpants, a stained T-shirt, ragged gym shoes. But then he stopped and he retraced his steps, and quick as a flash, his hand shot out and he grabbed my right breast, none too gently, and then grinning, he ran off. Now, for a moment, I was too shocked to move. But then anger erupted, and I took off after him. Now, there was no doubt in my mind that when I got a hold of him, I was going to beat the living daylights out of him. But the pavement and my low-heeled shoes had other ideas. My ankle twisted and I felt a wrenching pain. I bent over, gasping for breath, when I heard a whoop of triumph. And when I looked up, I saw the man disappearing down an alley. Well, I tentatively tested my weight on that ankle, and fortunately it held me, and with barely a perceptible limp, I made my way back to the bus stop. And I was relieved to see that it was coming down the street, and for once I was glad that it was a little late. When I got into town, I caught a corporation bus which would drop me outside of the general hospital where the interview was. By then I had regained my composure, and as I walked toward the main entrance of the hospital, I could see that the front was covered in scaffolding, and as I got closer, the young builders were wolf whistling and yelling things like, "Looking good, me duck," or "What you doing tonight?" Now, if I'd been with my good friend Gillian, I would have yelled back, "In your dreams, darling," or "You should be so lucky." But I was going for an interview. So I tried to keep stern, but I couldn't help but smile with satisfaction at their attention. In 1967, it would not have occurred to me that this was anything other than harmless banter. Well, the interview went well and I got the job. I was paid £5, 10 shillings a week. But by the time I had paid my mother for board and keep and my bus fare, I had very little left over for myself, and so I needed to find another job, which I did as a dental assistant. No training necessary. The training was on the job. And it was closer to home and just a short bus ride, and I was paid more, which pleased my mother and me. But being periodically splattered with blood and having to hold down the Polish men who refused to have Novocaine when they had a tooth pulled, I decided to look for something else. And I found what I thought was the perfect job. I found a job working as a clerical officer for the Department of Health and Social Security. This was the government department responsible for paying pensions and unemployment benefits and national health, dental reimbursements. I really felt that it could grow into a career. I could become an executive officer, which had considerable status and a salary that was more than generous. And it was perfect, except for Harold. And there's always a Harold. Now, Harold was about 50 years old. He was balding. He wore baggy corduroy trousers, what looked to be hand-knitted cardigans and dicky bows instead of ties. And he had a little thin moustache. And when he grinned, he revealed a set of tea-stained National Health dentures. Now, he and I worked in different departments, so I could avoid Harold for much of the time. But if I needed a file from a client we'd dropped from the books, I would have to go into the PA room, this little square box, windowless room filled with files. There's only one door in and one door, the same door out, and it was opposite Harold's office, so he could see when anyone went in there. The worst thing was that he always wore soft-soled shoes, so he would creep up silently behind me, particularly when I was bent over at a low, open filing cabinet. Oh, but I would feel him, his hands over my bottom. They would snake around to the front, inching ever upwards. Of course, I tried to pull away, but very often I was trapped in that room. And all the time he kept talking about cases he was working on and what files was I looking for. It made my flesh creep. And to this day, I do not know why I didn't grab hold of his cardigan and yell, "Take your hands off me. If you touch me again, there'll be trouble." After all, only a short year before, I had no trouble dealing with the man at the bus stop. There was no doubt in my mind that I would have thumped him had I got a hold of him. But perhaps I was on my home turf there. In the office, Harold was my superior. Not only was he an executive officer, he was also older than me, and I'd always been taught to respect my elders. He also spoke with a more refined accent than I did. Perhaps it was just a combination, but whatever it was, I remained silent. But not so for Sheila. She was one of the few other women who worked in the office. She had no such qualms. She came roaring into my office one day and she said, "Jen, does Harold touch you up when you're in the PA room?" I nodded. She said, "Same here. I'm going to make a formal complaint. Do you want to join me?" Well, I hesitated. I didn't want to be known as a troublemaker. I didn't want to get anyone into trouble. She was getting impatient. She said, "You know what, Jen? He won't stop until we say something. Somebody has to speak up." And I knew she was right. She handed me a letter that she had typed that described Harold's behavior. I could have written it myself. I signed it. And the next day we were called into the head boss's office and he said, "I want you to know that we're taking these complaints very seriously. Harold will be dealt with forthwith." And Harold was dealt with. The next week, Harold disappeared from the office. Our relief was very short-lived. We discovered that Harold had merely been moved to another office across the other side of town, where, of course, he would keep on doing what he had been doing in our office. And one evening after work, as I was walking toward the bus station, I saw Harold coming toward me. He stopped in front of me. He looked me up and down, sneered, and then he spat at my feet. The passers-by stopped. They were shocked. But then they all glared at me as if wondering what the heck I had done to deserve that. And I felt this explosion of shame, a blush in my cheeks. And then Harold brushed by me as if I were no more than a heap of trash. Now, there have been, over the past few years, an explosion of sexual harassment cases here in the US, especially the case of Larry Nassar. He was the physician for the ladies' US gymnastics team. When he physically examined them, he would systematically sexually abuse them. And I know people were asking, well, why didn't they speak up sooner? Why didn't they say something to someone? And I know that if I had been in their situation, I too would have remained silent. All those years ago with Harold, I would have remained silent had it not been for Sheila. And I'm tempted here to say that we all need a Sheila to speak up for us. But I think the real message here is that we need to speak up for ourselves. We need to dig down deep, find our own voice, and speak out. So, in a last word, I say, well, here's to Sheila, wherever she is in the world. But more importantly, here's to the Sheila who lives in each one of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer, for this super story and of course an eye opener, because I believe this has been happening since the start.
Time immemorial.
Yes.
That's right.
And I don't think anybody, just want to say about it because of something or the other reasons. Maybe you don't want to lose the job. Maybe you are in need of money. That is the main thing when these things happen at workplace.
Right. Yeah. And,
that's
I just wanted to point out, you might be wondering about the photograph behind me. This is a photograph of the high street of the village where I grew up, where I was born and raised. And there in the picture is a Midland Red bus, which I would catch into town.
Wow.
So
that is super.
I thought that would be fun to see.
Yes, absolutely.
So if anyone's got any comments, particularly how this story complements and continues what Elisa so elegantly and eloquently started.
Yes, please.
Everyone is stunned into silence.
Yes. So June says that story brought back so many feelings. Thank you for sharing. Thank you, June. Yes, Sukrita, you can please say.
Hello, Jennifer. So good to see you.
Nice to see you too, Shukrita.
Thank you. Well, Jennifer, firstly, I mean, the telling of the story was so beautiful because it was obviously, the way you brought up, the whole the sequence of events and how I could really feel that frustration when you fell on the street, and you couldn't follow him, you couldn't, give him that whack that you wanted, I could feel that, and it was really, really strong. And I was like, oh my God, please get up now. I wanted to help you. So yes, I mean, I can sense this, and yes, it's a story that would resonate with most of us as women, and but it's like the contrast between your then self who wanted to hold him and your later self at the workplace which was holding back, because of like you said, like Sheetal said about losing the job, or it could be something else. But there is this aspect of why do why are women quiet even today? So, and I think the story really brought out that aspect beautifully about of Sheila being in all of us. And that is so true. That is so true. And somehow, coincidentally, in my life, I have a very close friend named Sheila, and she's really like that. She's, she's
Good
really,
for her.
yes, she's really somebody who says, do what you love and don't hold back if somebody's, pushing you down. And she's like that whole thing that, don't hold back. Just say it if you feel it. And so, yeah, it was coincident, like, oh, Sheila's here too. So,
Wow.
thank you, Jennifer. Thank you so much for this wonderful story.
Yes. June?
Oh, thank you very much, Jennifer. I think for women of a certain age, the speaking out was almost unheard of. I mean,
Correct.
you
Correct.
didn't make trouble. You didn't accuse your father or your uncle or anything like that. And I think the feeling of being re-victimized keeps a lot of people silent. It's getting better now, but for so many years, it was you jeopardized yourself if you spoke out, certainly.
Yeah,
But that
definitely.
story was lovely. I'm sure it's going to resonate with so many people. Definitely. Thank you for sharing.
Yes. Anybody else? Yes, Bruce, please.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Bruce. How are you?
Great to see you, and wonderful
Nice to
story.
see you too. Thank you.
Telling that story, I mean, there must be some very strong feelings you had at the time. So tell us about kind of the evolution of your feelings from then to now, and how you can tell the story so that it's for an audience and not therapy.
Right. Oh, well, a good question. I think, I mean, when I think about the experience, particularly with Harold, the man at the bus stop, you know, they really pale by comparison to what those, poor gymnasts suffered systematically over an extended period of time. But it doesn't matter. The invasion of personal space, the taking of a liberty like that, the robbing you in that moment of your own personal dignity, I think all of that goes on when a person has the nerve to think that he has the right to do that to someone they perceive as less powerful. And it really is about power. And I think that, I think over the years, I mean, and I very purposely included the piece about the builders at the hospital who were yelling, because when I was growing up in Great Britain, that was prevalent. You would have, guys wolf whistle and make comments, usually very complimentary. And I never felt offensive at that. And really, in a way, on a spectrum, it's a similar thing. But I certainly didn't take offense. And I think it does raise the issue of when does that kind of behavior slip into the realm of becoming inappropriate, or whether we feel that even that is inappropriate, which is what we do nowadays. I mean, that really doesn't happen. Certainly, but I'm too old for that to happen to me now. But, I don't see that happening when I go home, when I'm going into town with a niece or whatever. So, I just think it really raises this whole discussion about appropriate behavior. And what is it that allows an individual to take a liberty like that? It would never occur to me to physically touch a colleague in an inappropriate way, no matter whether that colleague is a male or a female. It's just not appropriate in the workplace. So I think that happened to me so long ago. And we all have sadness and we all have things that we deal with. I think as storytellers, you rehearse the story to the point that it becomes a gift for the audience. It's not about you. You are merely the vehicle for presenting the gift. And so I don't say that there is a separation emotionally, but you have to have worked through the feelings of loss, the feelings of anger, and you have to present those emotions appropriately. If the fact that I was angry came over with that man at the bus station, at the bus stop, then that is appropriate. For me to lose my temper again and to get upset about it is not. That's not the purpose of storytelling. Or, you have to have worked through the emotions. I do stories involving the loss of my father, my mother's decline into dementia, and all those are very emotionally, they produce an emotional reaction, but hopefully in the audience, not in me. I have already worked through it. But thank you for the question. That was a great question.
Yes, Rachel, please.
You have to be a very strong person to be able to have tolerated that societal shaming and blaming and lack of empathy or sympathy or willingness to find out your side of the story when Harold came back and did that to you publicly. And that is one of the things that holds a lot of women back. There's the real fear of losing a job, but there's also the knowledge that many times, even if they stand up, the Harolds in the world are going to just be moved around, and it takes a mass movement before society supports the women. And really, so you were told, your bosses said, well, we take it seriously. They took it seriously. They removed Harold from being your problem, but they didn't really deal with the underlying problem, with what gave him that he was wrong in thinking he had the right to behave this way.
Right.
And as I said, the part when Harold came back and everybody shamed you, that is like so vivid to me and so upsetting, as upsetting, if not even more upsetting than what Harold actually did.
Right. But I regard that as a personal weakness because I allowed that to happen, but I was 17. So forgiveness comes into that too.
I don't know that you allowed it to happen. I'm not sure what else you could have done. Most of us wouldn't think it was appropriate to tell that whole group of people, well, he harassed me or he touched my body or something like that. That would be reliving the victim, the trauma. And these people didn't show any openness or willingness to hear what you were saying. And you knew that. So,
well, I see the Master of Ceremonies, Eric Miller, has arrived, which tells us that it's time for our next storyteller.
That's fine. That's absolutely fine. Thank you so much for sharing this story, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So let's welcome our next teller, Bruce Kirchoff. Sir, you here?
Hello, can you hear me all right?
Yes. To you, sir, please.
Oh, good. Thank you. So I don't have a story, but we'll tell one together, I guess, because I need some suggestions. Would you put in the chat, please, some suggestions from a story you'd like to hear? Yes, this is an improvised story. So I need your help.
Sure.
Bruce, would you prefer gallery mode or is this okay?
This is whatever you like. This is fine. Hiking, okay. One idea, hiking.
I think, okay.
I'd like to have several so that we can choose something.
As you know, the theme of the festival is growing and maturing.
Yes. Winter. Winter hiking.
Okay.
So your muses have all been turned off this morning? You can't think of a word for me? Only one person has suggested. Friendship, planting a seed, building on hiking in winter, animal encounter. Yeah. You're going to tell my story for me. A story where a boy learns to respect women. Yeah, I was thinking about that when Jennifer was telling her story. That's a very difficult story to tell. Peter was lonely. He'd been lonely for a long time and frustrated. And as the hormones build up, he got more and more frustrated. He tried the things that he knew that he felt so guilty about to relieve this intense feeling of frustration and sexual need that he had, but it just came back. He needed a woman. He didn't know how to get a woman. And that's how he thought about it. He thought about it as a woman. It wasn't a person to him. Didn't know what a person was, really, if you looked inside of him. He only knew that he needed something that a woman had. And he didn't know how to get it. He hated himself for it. He hated himself for these feelings. He hated himself for everything that was happening, but he had no control over it. He had these feelings anyway. He had this need. And so, yeah. He saw her at the bus stop. Boy, she was cute. He had everything that he wanted in a girl. Just exactly what he wanted. If he just knew how to say hello, if he just knew how to approach her. But he didn't. He was older. Oh, I mean, she was almost a kid, but oh my God, what a kid. She just, it was building up in him. He just had to do something. And so he walked up. He walked up to her. He just stood behind her that first time. I don't think she even knew he was there. And when the bus came, she got on and he walked away. Nothing happened. He went home and did what he needed to do to try to relieve himself, but he didn't work again. I mean, it worked for 10 minutes, for 15 minutes, for half an hour, for a couple of hours, for a day maybe, but then he was back and he needed a woman. And so the next time he saw her at the bus stop, he touched her purse. It was a little bump, just a little bump. She didn't notice it. It was just in the crowd, you know, you get bumps sometimes. Oh, but it felt good. It felt good, that little touch, that little thing that brought him some relief. So he knew he had to touch her. And he did next time. He reached around and he touched her breasts and it was so sweet. And he was almost laughing and he ran and she ran after him and there they were. She fell and he ran feeling elation and self-hate and not knowing what to do, but it was there and he got some relief and he got home. And his mother called. And she asked how he was doing. And he almost couldn't talk to her. He almost couldn't tell her how he was doing. He couldn't tell her because how he was doing was great and terrible and so tormented. And he thought about his mother standing there at a bus stop. And what would happen if someone came up to her and bumped her purse and reached around and, oh my God, he couldn't think about it. This wasn't right he wanted to go. This was ruining everything. He hung up the phone quickly, but his mother knew something was wrong and he called her back. She called him back. She wouldn't let it go. She asked him again and again what was happening. Why was he feeling this way? What was he feeling? What was going on? She knew that there was something tormenting him. He couldn't tell her. He couldn't tell her. He hung up again and left the house so he couldn't call and walked the streets, bought a bottle of wine and drank it and walked the streets. And before he knew it, it was night. He saw the people going home. He saw the women at the bus stops. And he thought about doing it again. I mean, it felt so good. That feeling of her breast under his hand, if he just had a woman. And he thought again of his mother. Of his mother standing at the bus stop. And what would he tell her? I mean, she was going to call again as soon as she got home. She'd probably been ringing the phone this whole time. Oh God, she hoped she wasn't coming over. She didn't live that far, a small bus ride across town. She could be there now at his apartment waiting for him. No. He wandered into a church. And there he was, sitting in the back pew. The remnants of that bottle of wine on the floor after him. He looked down at that and said, well, that probably shouldn't be here, but there it was. Took the last drink and was about to throw it into the next pew when this guy sitting across the aisle from him looked over at him with this bottle in his hand, about to toss it over to get rid of it, to get it out of his life, as like he could get rid of these feelings that he had. And this guy, just a little older than him, looked over at him and said, brother, what ails you? And he broke down crying. He broke down and he told him what he had done. He told him about his feelings and he told him how guilty he was about what he had done, and that he had bought the wine to try to kill the feelings and that it hadn't worked and he wanted to throw it, and he did throw the bottle then. The guy walked over and picked it up, came over and put his arm around him and said, brother, I know. I've been there. Come on, let's go get a cup of coffee. We'll talk about it. There's a way out. It's not an easy way, but there's a way out. You're going to have to find that woman and you're going to have to apologize. I'll come with you because she's probably going to slap you as soon as she sees you. But we'll make it together. And so they went. And they had a coffee. And it began for Peter. Eventually, he did get a woman, except he didn't get her. And it wasn't what he thought a woman was going to be. He got a relationship. And he was so thankful for that moment in the church when his friend, who he didn't know, looked over at him and said, "Brother, what ails you?" Thank you. So we have time for discussion.
Yes, absolutely, sir.
We can go back maybe to view where everyone can see each other.
Yes, I will do that.
You can put things in the chat if you'd rather not
Yes,
speak.
Jennifer, please carry on.
I think that was, I certainly wasn't anticipating that you would piggyback so closely onto my story. And I loved how you did it. I loved that this man was wrestling with, you gave us the internal look to the man who walked behind me. And I loved how you understood from his description, the ragged gym clothes, where he would be coming from. And I think you captured that beautifully. And of course, it's sort of looking for love, but all in the wrong ways, right? And I thought there was a moment when the woman falls down and he's running away. Part of me at that point wanted him to turn back and to come back and say, "I'm sorry," and help her up. But I love the way that you ended it, because I thought, I don't know where he's going to go with this. And I love that you took it to a logical conclusion, that those kinds of feelings, unsatisfied, unresolved, lead to these cravings that ultimately not only harm the individual, but ultimately will harm other people. And how there was a resolution of that, and it wasn't easy. Say, apologizing, it was almost like a 12-step program.
Mhm. Yeah.
Worked out there and then. So I thought that was lovely.
Yeah, I felt it was too easy. I mean, it couldn't be an easy thing for him. And in fact, the story was really too short to show what he would have to go through to make that transition. But I wanted to get some of that in there. So
yeah,
in the time I had.
Oh, it was the right decision to make. Absolutely.
Yes, anybody would like to say anything else, please?
Yeah.
Yes, we have.
Hello. Right here.
Yes, yes,
Hey,
Nora.
so thank you so much for that story. I think this is a very, for me, a very unique situation where a man takes up that kind of challenge. I'm 45 years married to the same guy. I'm a mother of 4 daughters, and I frequently say to men when they will listen to me, "What are you guys doing about this?" It's like all very well and good to say, "You don't rape people and you don't do these things," but what are you doing? Because it will take men talking to men to change this situation. I can't, as a woman, do that. It just is not, it doesn't have the same weight. It's not, I mean, of course I talk to men about it, but obviously, how has that been working for me? Men need to talk to men. And the fact that you took up that challenge, I think it's a very unique situation where a woman tells a story about being assaulted, where a man will take up the challenge to say, what's that about? How do I feel? What could be different? What could happen? So I appreciate that you took up that challenge. And I hope that Jennifer and other women who have had this experience of being assaulted, I don't know, I'm just speaking for myself. It feels good to me to hear someone address that.
Thank you.
I mean, the other people who have maybe been more violently hurt might be like, I don't want to hear this. But
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nora. Yes, Sukrita.
Thank you for this story, Bruce. I felt almost like, I felt empathetic towards him, actually, when I heard this side of the story. And I felt that, at the end of the day, like we all are human. So even whatever flaws we have, or I mean, there is a struggle behind that, and how quick we are sometimes to blame or to take sides, and women take the side of other women, and men sort of, they are, the enemy, or they're bad, and it's like, no, but there is a story there, and there is a struggle, the human struggle, and that you brought out so beautifully, where he knew he was not doing the right thing, yet he was tormented. And that itself was, it just brought out this beautiful human element. I just want to say that was wonderful. And I think it's good to always know two sides of the story all the time, and not maybe just, I mean, not to judge anybody, but just to see them for who they are and what they're going through at that moment. So thank you for this story.
Yeah, thank you.
Very true, Sukrita. We always need to put ourselves in other person's shoes sometimes, to experience from their side. Yes, anybody else, please? Would like to give feedback or their insights on the story?
I feel like I should say some more things, although I think it's what everyone has said has been perfect about it. I just want to acknowledge that these things should never happen. But I also, people say you can find everything that's evil has been done in the world, you can find it in yourself. And so I see that part of myself that I hope I've never acted on. I mean, I know I've never done anything like that happened to Jennifer. I guess I remember the frustration of wanting a relationship with someone who didn't want it to me. And I remember slapping her hand. We were talking together, and I mean, our hands were down on the side next to each other, and I slapped her hand. And I just feel so much guilt about that after hearing Jennifer's story. So I haven't thought about that in many years. That's the closest I came. But I mean, that helped me in telling the story, feeling that there's something in me that felt those same kind of frustrations and things that I had to find a way to work through. Yeah, I guess that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Thank you so much. Yes. Anybody else, please? Okay, shall we move to our next teller?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you for being here today. Mary Louise?
I think Mary Louise is not here yet. So why don't we go on to Bruce Marcus?
Marcus, yes. Bruce Marcus, please. You can on your video. Please there.
I know Bruce is here, and we saw him a few minutes ago.
Yes, he was here. Yes,
There he is. Hello, Bruce.
I just stepped out of the room momentarily. Is the storyteller who is lined up to go next not going next?
She's not here.
Oh, okay.
She's just coming in now.
She's
just coming in now. So now we have a King Solomon-like decision. I think you should go if you feel ready. Bruce, why don't you tell, and Mary. Hello, Mary Louise. Can you wait a few minutes until after Bruce tells? Great. Go ahead, Bruce.
Okay, thank you. Well, we've had a single theme this morning. I'm going to change things up just a little bit. And in the past, we've had a host that's had us kind of introduce ourselves. So I'll just say that I'm Bruce Marcus. And good morning, everybody from Boston, Massachusetts, or 7 miles north of Boston, Massachusetts. I'm in the same time zone as Jennifer and I think Bruce. And so we're very North American heavy this morning, aren't we, for these stories? And this is a coming of age story that's probably no less intense than what we've been hearing, but it's a lot more comic. Well, it was a lot more intense for me anyhow. And I call this story A Tale of Two Grottos. Now, when I was an adolescent, one of my buddies and I like to go into stores and leave with merchandise for which we did not pay. I am not proud of this. I'm certainly not bragging. I'm just relating to you one of the many exploits of a sometimes foolish young person who just coincidentally so happened to one day grow into, well, me.
Yeah.
Now my mother, who could be strict at times, seemed to have not only her suspicions, but this uncanny radar for such things. Where did you get this, she asked, somehow picking out from the chaotic jumble of my bedroom floor this pricey-looking single-volume collection of 1960s underground comics. From the bookstore, I told her, which was true. I just conveniently left out the part about not having paid for it. With what money, she asked. Ooh, I was afraid she was going to go there. From my paper route, I told her. I delivered the Sunday morning Boston Globe on my bicycle to folks in the neighborhood. But I hadn't used the money to purchase the book because I hadn't, technically speaking, purchased the book. Well, I thought you were, and I hated to lie to my mother, but hey, if she found out what I was up to, I was afraid she was not going to allow me to go anywhere again with my friends until I was old enough to move out of the house and take a place on my own. I thought you were banking your paper route money, my mother said. Well, I am, I told her, mostly. Well, just when I thought she had me in a corner and was going to declare checkmate and come in for the kill, she set down the book, said, lunch will be ready shortly, and stepped out of my bedroom. One afternoon after school, my friend and I paid a visit to the bookstore at the local mall. We found an aisle with some cool-looking books, checked around to make sure nobody was watching us, multiple times, pretty much telegraphing our intentions. And then we took some of those cool-looking books and we slid them into the pockets of our winter jackets. Fortunately, it was winter at the time, so at least our jackets didn't look too suspicious. All at once, a very serious-looking man descended upon us. He was an old guy, like 30, with a button-down shirt, conservative tie, and lasers for eyes that bored into us. Heard you boys were taking books, he said. My stomach turned to a solid block of ice, and my throat closed up to the size of a pinhole. Oh, no, sir, not us, my friend and I squeaked in unison. Ignoring our declaration, the man stepped over to my friend, who was standing with his jacket unzipped, with the side flaps hanging forward and clearly loaded down. The man slapped the forward-hanging side flaps of my friend's jacket. Whap! A book. Thunk! Another. Empty your pockets, he commanded. And while my friend sheepishly, guiltily, and miserably pulled brand new bookstore books out of the pockets of his winter jacket, the man came over and slapped the forward-hanging side flaps of my unzipped jacket. Fwhip! No book. Fwhip! No book. I had this snorkel jacket. Some of you might remember the style, some of you of my vintage from the 1970s. I think they came in a few colors, but most of the ones I saw were like mine. Puke green with fake fur lining the edge of the hood. Well, the pockets of my jacket had long since ripped out so that anything I placed into them slid all the way down to the bottom of the lining. On this particular occasion, I'd taken two books, one on each side, and pushed them all the way around to the back, one over the other, where, I was quite sure, they must have formed a large rectangular bulge, clearly visible to anyone standing behind me, which at the moment this man was not. Follow me, the man said, and he led us toward the back of the bookstore. Now, my friend and I, we were basically decent kids. It didn't even occur to us to resist or run away. We followed him like lambs being led to slaughter. I'd never been in any real trouble before, and I was giddy with panic, practically incontinent as he led us through a door along the back wall, down a small hallway, and into the bookstore office, which, as it turned out, was actually a small grotto, dimly lit with torches, with skulls lining the walls, and it occurred to me, they must be the skulls of other young shoplifters. Dripping stalactites hung from the ceiling, and I realized with horror they were dripping with blood. The blood of other young shoplifters. "See that sign," the man said, and one appeared out of nowhere on the dank, slime-covered stone wall right where he was pointing. It read, "Shoplifters will be prosecuted." "In this store, we prosecute shoplifters," the man said. Now, I'll allow as how at 14, I didn't know exactly what prosecution meant, but I knew that it was trouble of a legal nature, big, lasting trouble, and I thought, oh no, not me. Oh please don't prosecute me. But we're not going to prosecute you today. And I thought, oh, thank goodness. We are, however, going to call your parents. I pictured my parents then. First, my father, who was an easygoing guy, rarely ever got involved in disciplining his children. I loved him dearly and hated to think that how much this might disappoint him. And then I pictured my mother, standing with her fists on her hips, her eyebrows knit together firmly and her mouth drawn in a thin, firm line, and I thought, prosecute me, please! Well, the man then asked us for our telephone numbers, which, being the compliant ovine we were, we gave to him accurately. He then lectured us for an interminable 5 minutes on the ills of shoplifting and told us how, if he ever caught us doing it again in his store, he would indeed proceed with prosecution. And then he told us he was going to set us free. He shepherded us out of the bookstore office grotto, down the small hallway and back into the bookstore proper. The walk up that wide main aisle was the longest of my life. Numb with shock, I staggered along past the curious stares of other shoppers and the bookstore employees, past the accusatory glare of the glossy, brand new books that lined that aisle, all the while acutely aware of the large rectangular bulge that I knew must be clearly visible in the back of my jacket, waiting for someone at any moment to stop me, demand that I empty my jacket, and decide to proceed with prosecution anyway. And waiting for me at the front of the store was the merchandise detector. And I knew that if no one stopped me before then, I figured that surely would. As I trudged along toward that merchandise detector, I could see it as though through a tunnel of fog, and had this curious sensation that it kept growing farther and farther away from me. And then, all at once, I was approaching it, and now I was stepping into it. I cringed, waiting for alarm bells to blare. Miraculously, none did. I stepped out the other side into the atrium of the mall, and I was free, but hardly relieved. For I had stepped from the proverbial frying pan and was now headed into the fires of hell back home. To my complete astonishment, my parents had completely redecorated our kitchen that very afternoon, in the exact same grotto style as the bookstore office, complete with torches and skulls. At the dinner table, the interrogation began at once. "So," my mother asked, "what did you do after school today?" She said this in a light, easy conversational tone that I knew was intended to lull me into a false sense of security. "Nothing," I told her, being sure to maintain careful eye contact with the meatloaf and mashed potatoes on my plate. "Just went to the mall." "Oh," she said, "with whom?" Maintaining eye contact with my dinner plate, I told her the name of my friend who'd been with me. "I hope you boys aren't shoplifting," she said. I felt my entire body go hot, especially my neck and head. I pushed my face farther toward the dinner plate till my nose was practically touching the overcooked frozen peas. "Don't worry, Ma," was all I could think to say. And then I waited in this position with my head hanging over the dinner plate like a condemned man at the guillotine, waiting for the blade to come down and separate my miserable head from my body. I waited in this position for 3 weeks while my mother took another bite of her dinner. And then she said, "I hear the Gainsboroughs next door are going to finally cut down that massive oak tree, the one that keeps pelting their cars with acorns every fall." And I thought, wait, did the guy from the bookstore even call her? She never brought it up again that meal. And all through the rest of that dinner, where I ate very little of my food and did so without much appetite or enthusiasm, I wondered, had the guy called? All the rest of that evening, avoiding my parents as best I could by hiding out in my bedroom with the door closed, I wondered. For the following days, weeks, months, I wondered. Fast forward 25 years, a quarter of a century. I'm a young adult now and telling this same story at an art center in the far western suburbs of Boston. In the audience on this particular afternoon is my now elderly mother. When I reach this point in the story, I stop and look out at her in the audience. Recognizing the fact that she no longer holds any punitive authority over me, I say, "And Mom, did the guy from the bookstore ever actually call you?" And my mother says, for everyone present in that room to hear, "No." And I thought, he didn't call? He didn't call? The guy from the bookstore never called? He never called. And then I realized he didn't need to call. I mean, yeah, he had the authority of being bookstore manager or whatever, and knew, very well actually, how to scare kids into losing their taste for shoplifting. But there was one thing the man lacked, and for which he was absolutely no match, and that, my friends, was the awe-inspiring, eerily uncanny power of maternal radar. A Tale of Two Grottos. Thank you so much.
Amazing, amazing. Bruce, that was super telling. I loved the voice modulation you did while telling the story. And I open up to the audience to give their feedback, please.
What you presented was larger than life.
Yes. Moms have superpower.
It reminds me of terrifying experiences I've had.
Yes, Bruce, please.
Great. Great story, Bruce. You made the Bruces proud.
I feel like I'm in a Monty Python sketch.
Yes.
Bruce.
I think I spaced out at the end and I didn't understand what he lacked. I didn't understand the last little bit when you said he lacked the power of the
maternal radar.
Yes. Can you unpack that a bit for me? I missed that.
Yeah, in my mind, her intuition was a more powerful element at getting me to stop my evil ways than the considerable scare that the bookstore manager gave me.
You think that she intuited something there, or was it just you, do you think, feeling guilty because he told you he was going to call the, was it all internal, or was it your mother actually intuiting?
Well, remember, he never actually found books on me.
Yeah.
And I found out just a few years ago that he actually did call my friend's family.
Aha.
But not mine, interestingly.
But when he was telling the story, he said, your mother asked, "Have you been shoplifting?" So she had that intuition.
Yep, and I had actually that day didn't bring those books home. They ended up in a trash can at the at a trolley station on my way home because I didn't want to get caught with the evidence. I see Nora has her hand up. Nora, what you got? And long time no see, Nora. Nora and I were at the WGBH studios in Boston last night watching the taping of the nationally broadcast Stories from the Stage television show.
That's right. It's rare that we see each other twice in 12 hours. Thanks for this story. As a former shoplifter myself, never caught. It's an interesting, and I think on it now, and certainly as I was raising children, it was not a story I ever told my daughters. But so how do you feel? What was your understanding about the act of shoplifting when you were doing it? And how do you understand it now? That what were you doing? What were we doing?
My understanding now is that an adolescent's brain is not fully formed. And probably a lot of these males that you've been talking about all day, some of them are not fully formed in one way or another, but I think there was some bravado involved at the time. You know, most of the things I was taking weren't things I needed or wanted, although the 1960s underground comic book was actually pretty cool. But I was heading down a wrong path, and I was just as relieved to give it up. I will say I didn't quit all at once. I kind of weaned myself off. Showing how little sense I still had at that age.
Right. It's an interesting, psychologists probably would have many different, I mean, I was an extremely shy, extremely retiring person. So I think there was something there of, for me, some deep psychological reason to be bad and to not get caught and to do things. But I actually stole books that I needed for school and art supplies. But still,
yeah,
right?
Being motivated by financial necessity is another matter.
But it's still stealing, you know. So anyway, but thank you for the story.
Thanks for your comments and questions. Yeah,
and you
Jenny.
told it at a Mass Mouth Story Slam, probably 10 years ago.
Well, I'll tell you where else I told it. An interesting bit of synchronicity. I told it on the Stories from the Stage show during season 1. And last night was the first time I've been back in that studio since then. And here I am telling it today at the Chennai Storytelling Festival. So I think that just there's something feels really right about that. I also had a chance to tell that story once at a house party that was in a housing development in my hometown that didn't exist when I was a kid, that was diagonally across the street from the mall where the story, where the first scene in the story takes place, or the second scene in the story. Yeah.
Right.
Yes, Jenny.
I'm going to curtail my comment. I just thought your language choice, your word choice, it was beautiful. I thought all of that was lovely. But I do think it's time maybe to go on to our next storyteller, I suspect.
Yes, I think Mary had to say something.
Oh, yes, I just wanted to say how that story, I'm also being a young shoplifter myself, but I really thought that story also showed the importance of that inner conscience that develops with children, but it can only develop with parenting. And it was there inside you, your mother. But I mean, it's so important to help children and teenagers as they grow to develop that inner sense of what's right and wrong, because you knew you were doing something wrong. And it's up to your parents to have done that for you. Parents are very important people.
Super. Thank you so much, Bruce.
Thank you, everybody,
for sharing the story with us. Yes. Anybody else? Shall we go on to our last storyteller of the day? Mary, you're most welcome. All to
Hello.
you. Hello.
I'm sorry I was late, but I got my times mixed up again. I thought I had it down just right, but of course that wasn't the case. And yes, thank you very much. It's wonderful to be part of the Chennai Storytelling Festival again. And thank you, Eric, for all your work. You must have I don't know, what's the word, ulcer by the end, wondering, are those people going to check in? Where are those tellers? And I hope I didn't contribute to that today. All right, well, my story was a story that I heard from another teller several years ago, and he visited my hometown of Winnipeg, and I asked him, "Oh, is it okay if I tell that story too? I really liked it." And he told me where he had found it, and I even emailed the people that live in that area of the country to say, "Is it okay if I tell this story?" And I did get an email back. And then we moved out to the farm, and our farm is on the edge of a river. I'm near the boreal forest, just east of Winnipeg now, which is in Manitoba. And along the river, there's a path worn by the bears that come every year. So that even made me more drawn to this story. So I'll start. It's a story about an old man, an old hunter. It comes from the Tlingit people that live in Alaska and in the Yukon. And he was so old, all his family was dead, all his friends were gone, and he lived alone. And he was lonely, and he felt useless. He felt like there wasn't really anything he could do anymore. And he thought, well, if I were dead, that would probably be the best thing. But how could I do away with myself? Oh, he thought about that for quite a while, and then he remembered that outside his village near the salmon stream was the path that the bears walked along as they hunted along the edge of the water. And he thought, I'll give myself to the bears, and I'll be of use to some creature at the end of my life. And before he could get cold feet about that, the very next day, he set out of his village and he walked down to the salmon stream, and he saw the path that the bears made, and he lay down across the path. And he didn't have long to wait. He heard the sound of walking, the crackling of bushes, that sort of sound that there's somebody coming along the path. And he looked over, and there was a group of bears walking along the path, led by a very large grizzly bear who was very old because the tips of his ears were white. They stopped at the man lying on the path. And the man looked up at them, and the grizzly bear stood up on his hind legs and looked at him as if to say, what are you doing here on our path? And all of a sudden, the old hunter realized he wasn't ready to die. And before he realized it, the words came out of his mouth. He didn't even think. He said, I'm here to invite you to a feast at my house. I'm lonely, and I want you to come and have a meal with me. And that big bear, he kind of went down on all four, and he swayed his head around, looked at the ones behind him, and the old hunter thought he was saying yes. And so the bears turned around and walked away, and the old man got up and ran home. And then he began to prepare his food and his home. He cleaned it, he tidied it. He prepared cranberries in grease, and he found fish, and he roasted them just a little bit so they were still a little raw. And then he took off his shirt, and he put red paint on the tops of his arms and across his chest, stripes of red paint. Now his neighbors saw all this and they thought, we haven't seen that old man this busy in ages. What's going on? And so they went and asked him. And he said, oh, I'm inviting some grizzlies for dinner. What? Grizzlies are our enemies. You can't do that. Why would you do that? But the old man didn't have an answer for them. He just continued his preparations. And so for the rest of the day, the rest of the villagers hid inside their homes. And the old man waited at his open door. And presently, the bears came up from the stream and the path along the stream, and through the village they came, led by the big bear with the white tips on his ears. And he welcomed each bear as it walked past him into his home. And he had made places for them all to be in front of his fire. And then he served them platters of cranberries in grease and platters of salmon and other special foods that he had created, especially for them. And everything was wonderful, and everybody ate, and all the food was gone. And then that old bear, he sort of didn't actually stand up, but he kind of raised himself a little bit from where he was reclining, and he opened his mouth and he looked up at the smoke hole in the house, and he started to speak. The old hunter couldn't understand any of his talk, but he listened with his heart. And the bear spoke for quite a long time. And then he rose and he went out the door, and the others followed. It was time for them to leave. The hunter went and stood by the door, thanking each bear. And each bear, as it passed the hunter, licked some of the red paint from his arms and his chest. And then they walked through the village, down along the path along the salmon stream. And the next morning, very early, it was barely dawn, one of the bears returned to the old hunter's house. And the old hunter, even years after, thought, did I dream that, or did it really happen? Because the little bear spoke to him in the hunter's own language, Tlingit. And he said, I just came back to tell you that I used to be human, but I've lived with the bears for so long now that I'm now one of them. But I wanted to know, did you understand what our old bear was telling you last night? No, said the hunter, I listened with my heart. Well, said the little bear, he was telling you that he too is old, and his family and friends are dead, and he too gets lonely. And he wanted you to know that whenever you feel lonely and useless, think of him, because you are the same. Now, after that, the people in the village had a really different opinion of that old hunter. He was no longer useless. He was brave and wise. He had feasted with the enemies. But from then on, the story goes, the people in that village, whenever they knew that there was an enemy nearby, they would always invite that enemy to share a meal with them, just like the old hunter had done with the grizzlies. And that's where the story ends. Thank you.
Super. Yes, so Mary, I would like to ask why this story? What made you tell this story?
Well, when Eric said that this was about community, I was thinking that quite often we don't recognize our communities, or we don't stay open to adding to our community. We only think the only people that we want in our community are the people we agree with or recognize or are the same as us. And I was thinking actually of the conflicts that are in the world right now, that this story has some wisdom for seeing that how like you your enemies are, the people you have thought of as your enemies, perhaps to change one's mind about somebody considered an enemy, and the good that can come from that. And there isn't really anything to be afraid of. So that's why I chose it.
Thank you so much for the amazing story. Yes, I leave it to the audience. Yes, Jennifer.
I thought this was a really interesting story as a reflection on, what came earlier. And I think it raises a really wonderful point. In my story, my response is to be angry and to deal with a problem by getting angry, and how different it would be to say to Harold, why don't we go and have a cup of coffee together? Tell me why you feel that you can't touch me inappropriately. If we had a discussion rather than anger and silence and fear, and that story shows so eloquently how inviting the enemy to the table is probably the most effective way to moving, societies, communities forward. So thank you very much, Mary.
Yes, Nora.
I wonder if, building on what Jennifer just said, do you know the story of Mary Beard, the academic in England, who was being horribly attacked online by many young men, but one in particular, she invited him out to lunch.
Hmm.
And if you Google Mary Beard invites troll to lunch, you can hear so it's a very I just think it relates to so many of the stories that we've had, showing the human side to all the harm that's done in the world, even by those who do the harm, that there's a human side there.
Hmm.
So thank you.
Thank you, Nora. Yes, Eric, you have to say something. Okay. Yes, anybody else? Yes, Nancy, please.
Hi, thank you for the story. I just want to make a comment that I found it was interesting that the old man, like the motive, the way he met the bears was that he initially kind of felt he was useless, like he didn't have any purpose in life. And it was just, I just kind of find it ironic, but then once like you're at the edge of death, you suddenly realize, oh, you don't want to die. And then it just like worked out that way, and he found a purpose, and he continued living. So I just thought that was interesting, like the way it happened. Thank you for the story.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you so much.
That's what actually drew me to the story, was it seemed so improbable that one would go and lay down and wait for bears to come. But one would do anything that was really frightening or scary. And it, you know how it is when you learn a story or you hear one and you want to learn, there's always some part of it that draws you to it. And that goes, yeah, I want to learn that story. And that was the part, yeah.
It's very true. Yes, anybody else would like to give any insights on the story?
I think Moira.
Mara, yes. You're not audible?
Yeah, okay. I have to take the earphones away. Yes, the stories this afternoon have been, here it's afternoon at least, are amazing. It's just like one fits into the other. And if there are any questions left open, the next story will answer. It's amazing. And I look forward to watch the recording. Mary, it's sort of sometimes I think you all know the experience. You hear the story which you need to hear, and one sentence in particular hit home when you said the community is not just to include the people who think and feel and react like we do, and I have an issue with that, with storytelling on Sunday for a group which is important in the interfaith dialogue, but where I disagree in so many of things handling it. And it's really sort of invite them to dinner, invite my own fear and resentment and not feeling enough respected to the table and say, okay, that's the way it is. Like in the beautiful poem by Rumi, which most of you know, The Guest House. So serve them a tea and say, it's the way it is, and let's make the best out of it. So thank you so much for this story, for all your stories. Okay. And thank you, Sheetal, for moderating, for giving that frame.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. It was indeed an honor to host every one of you. So here comes end to our session today, Eric.
Yeah.